Thanks again, Bettina. Thank you, Britta, for inviting me. It's really exciting to me to be here today, actually, because it's the first time that I will be speaking in front of linguists, which is a space that is not mine. It's not my own, but it's one that I've always been very, very interested in. So I'm also here I consider this an opportunity for me to learn. And I really hope that's what will happen today. So, but let's start. So many of you, or some of you have probably seen this story. This made the cover of Time earlier this year. And if you have not heard about this, don't worry, I will tell you what happened. I think this is a good example to start here with the topic of data work. So what happened here is that to make ChatGPT less toxic, you know, ChatGPT, that tool that we are all using right now, OpenAI, which is the company that develops and markets ChatGPT, had workers manually classifying text snippets, separating those that were appropriate, acceptable to be used as training data from those that were not acceptable. And this included dealing, that these workers had to deal with the material that you see on screen now, sexual abuse, including child abuse, bestiality, murder, suicide, torture, and so on. So everything that is ugly about this world, everything that is also ugly about the internet in itself. So this needs to be done at scale, as anything that has to do with data work and with AI. Always, you know, the value driving these things is it needs to work for everyone, and it needs to be big and large and done at scale. So what OpenAI did is outsource this task and send it to subcontracted workers through a third-party company called Zama in Kenya. And it had these workers in Kenya work under not so pretty working conditions, pay them less than $2 an hour. And before you ask, no, $2 an hour is not a lot of money in Kenya or in any other place. And after being exposed to this highly disturbing material, after the workers reported feeling psychologically ill, many of them couldn't return to work. Some of them even reported, and I'm saying reported, they work with us, so they told us how they lost their families. Some were left by their partners because of the PTSD, because of the mood swings, and so on. So very, very difficult conditions. Neither Zama nor OpenAI offered these workers any type of psychological support or any other type of support for that matter. And again, many of the workers even lost their jobs from the psychological damage they endured. Now, why am I showing you this example? Again, I feel this is a good start discussing a very graphic example of what data work is. But it's not just an example. This is a textbook case of what data work is. When I talk about the data work, by the way, probably you've gathered already that I'm talking about what others have called micro work, crowdsourcing, or how the press likes to put it, the hidden workers behind the AI revolution, or something like this. So I'm talking about the labor that goes into producing data that will be used to train and validate AI systems. And again, going back to this case, the type of task, the outsourcing through a third-party company in a low-income country, the vulnerability and the precarization of these workers, all this is textbook data work. There is nothing specific. There is nothing exceptional about this example. This is really the rule of how data work is structured within the AI industry. And the irony of this case is that, and of many others that are similar to this one, is that all this is done in the name of creating actually a safer ChatGPT, one that is free of biases, one that is free of toxicity. So in the name of what we know as ethical AI. But cases like this one, and this brings me to the second reason why am I showing you this example, and it's also, you know, at the same time, one of the two core messages that I want to convey today. Cases like this one show something that I and some other colleagues have been saying for years now, and that's that AI ethics as a field of discourse and research cannot just be about fairness metric, bias mitigation, toxicity reduction, or the technical aspects of it all. Power concentration, power differentials between the workers that participate in the production of AI systems and data, labor in itself needs to become a fundamental core dimension in the field that we call AI ethics, and it's in any research endeavors that we take as AI ethics people. So, taking a step back, I want to briefly talk about how I started thinking of these things. So I am by training a sociologist and a computer scientist, both. But when I started thinking of these things and doing work on and with data workers, it was 6 years ago. This was not a very popular field, neither within computer science nor within the sociology. And back then, I was only a sociologist. I didn't have a technical background. This came afterwards. And it started when I joined a group at the LITHME Institute, where I was the only social scientist among a group like many computer scientists. I was the only one. And the group was about ethical AI. And my dear colleagues, they were doing great work around bias mitigation tools, fairness metrics, explainability techniques. And I had a hard time grasping what those meant and what that meant for AI, for me, and for the communities I cared for. Until I realized that I was missing, that all these things, bias mitigation tools, metrics, and techniques, they were artifacts. And I, as a sociologist, needed to understand this from the social, from the human. And I was like wondering, where are the social dynamics and the social relationships in this? And also, this is when it became clear to me that computer scientists, but also especially AI practitioners, have a very specific understanding of what data is in AI and as a field, but also among computer scientists. And this is a disciplinary way of dealing with these questions of what data is. Data is considered a given, something that is just there and can be just collected and can be just used. We talk about things like raw data or ground truth data, as is the focus of my research. And this is very common. We talk about raw data as if it was something that is a raw product that hangs from trees and we just take it and use it and that's it. However, anyone who has ever worked with data, we researchers, students, among others, we know that there's nothing raw or nothing natural or given about data. Data, producing data, using it into use data takes a lot of work. And I'm talking again of data that is used for AI or otherwise, just in general. So I thought it was important to go out and find out which unequal social relations, social relations in general are involved in the production of data for AI systems. This is what interested me at the time. And out I went. I conducted observations, workshops, interviews, document and interface analysis. Currently, we are working on a project called the Data Workers Inquiry, in which we involve data workers as co-researchers. This is very important to me, not to speak for, but to speak with the data workers. And in all these years, we have engaged communities of data workers in Syria, Iraq, the places that you see on the map, Bulgaria, Argentina, Germany, Venezuela, Kenya, and Brazil. Many of these workers are refugees, many of them are migrants, and all of them actually are in different ways in very vulnerable situations. So what I wanted to know is where, how, and by whom is AI data produced? And also, I didn't want to stop at creating, a catalog of terrible working conditions, labor conditions, and say, well, this is exploitative and that's it. But also, as a computer scientist, I want to know, what does this mean for data sets and systems? What does it do to an AI system to be trained on data that has been produced under those specific labor conditions? So I would say let's start with some answers. And the first thing to know about data work is that it is mostly outsourced. When done at scale, and I repeat, scale is something as a very important word when it comes to AI systems, data work is outsourced. When I say outsourced, I mean that it is not done in the same organizations that work on the models, that work on training the algorithms and developing the algorithms. So it's not done in the same buildings, it's not done in the same organizational structure, and it is not done, in most of the cases, not even in the same country. So there is a geographical separation, a physical separation between the work of the modelers and between the work of the data workers. And this may appear counterintuitive to have these two types of work that are so intrinsically related to one another, separated. And the separation is not just physical, but it also is in terms of how both types of work are regarded. So when we think of the work of the modelers, the people who develop the algorithms, we tend to glamorize that. We tend to think of the genius engineer in Silicon Valley who has developed this groundbreaking algorithm. And when we talk about the data workers, or when we hear about the data workers, we hear things like low skill, click work, as if it was just about, clicking on something and that's it. We hear blue collar jobs. We talk about micro work as if it was just micro, minor, small type of work, when it's actually a very, very fundamental type of work without which AI systems as we know them today wouldn't exist. So when we say it's outsourced, it's also worth mentioning that for the outsourcing, there are platforms like Amazon Mechanical Turk and many others that operate for, where workers can just do this job. There are also specialized companies that, as the one that I was discussing on the first slide related to Kenya, this company Sama. There are many others like this. And the clients, the people who outsource these tasks are, of course, tech companies of all sizes, from big tech in Silicon Valley to smaller startups. And also, I think it is important to mention that research organizations are in many cases requesters, research organizations like universities or research institutes who work on, advancing AI research. And in many cases, they need data work done at scale to do that. Although it's also worth mentioning that not every company and not every university has the resources to outsource data work or to produce or to commission the production of data. So if we look at this map here, you see, I don't know if you can see my my mouse, but here you see the blue dots in this case are the requesters, and the red dots are the data workers. So if we look at the red dots, we see at the blue dots, we see a concentration here in North America, especially the US. We see a concentration here in Central and Northern Europe. Now, if we are going to look to for the red dots, which are the data workers, we need to start looking towards south, towards the east. Again, this speaks to the geographical separation that I was mentioning before, but it also speaks of huge power differentials between requesters and data workers. And for these clients, as you can imagine, outsourcing these tasks is considerably cheaper and faster than having it done in-house. It's faster because you have a massive workforce available to do this work in real time. And also it's cheaper, well, because these companies outsource to places that are ridden, in many cases, ridden by war, by economic crisis, by even natural catastrophe, places where inflation in most cases is high, where unemployment is high. And within those places, within those poor regions in the world, they also target specifically underserved communities. So in the space of data work, you will hear a lot about programs that target, for example, single mothers in rural India, or refugees in Kenya, refugees coming from other African countries to Kenya. The same thing in Latin America, Venezuelan refugees going to Colombia or to Argentina. So there are many programs directed to these specifically underserved populations. And I'm mentioning this not to say that this is a bad thing. Of course, it is great that people who otherwise don't have a lot of opportunities are able to find work. But what remains unsaid in many cases is that these companies make huge profit on the labor of these people and take advantage of these specifically vulnerable situations in which these people find themselves. And also, this is possible because when outsourced data work is conducted under very precarious conditions, under conditions that could be named as exploitative, even where most workers are paid only a few cents per task. They don't count, and they don't count with the protection or the benefits that we relate with more traditional employment relationships. They don't have, for example, a health insurance that would help them in cases where they become psychologically ill. As we said before, they don't have any type of security if they are not able to work. The fact that they are paid per task means that not all the time that they invest in this work is paid time. So, for example, they are only paid per picture they label or per picture they upload, but they are not paid for the time that takes them to find the task, make sense of the task, understand the task, and not to mention if there's some sort of technical hiccup or something happens with the platform they are working on, they are not paid for all that time. So stepping out now from the question of labor conditions, let us look into what type of tasks data work comprise. So as I said before, it's the labor that goes into producing data for AI. What does that mean? So there are actually 4 types of tasks that you see here on screen, and we generally work with this taxonomy to analyze the tasks that we observe on the field or with our co-researchers when we work directly with data workers. So the first one has to do with data generation. And data generation can range from collecting information that is publicly available online to workers producing data with their own bodies, as in recording their voices, speaking, reading a text snippet in one specific language with one specific accent, for example, or uploading selfies when it comes to image data and to computer vision. The workers are asked to upload images of themselves, images or videos of them doing specific activities, images of also their neighbors, their family members. As it is here described on the slide, upload an image of their prescription values. And by the way, these are real tasks given to real workers. And then the second category has to do with data annotation or data labeling, as is also broadly known. That has to do with classifying and interpreting the content of data. So think of an image. It has to do with saying, well, this is a tree, this is a person, this is a car. It can also have to do with adding keywords and describing the possible uses of a data point. It can also be about labeling it in terms of, well, this is appropriate, this is inappropriate, or sexually explicit, for example, as it is described here on the task on screen. And then the third type of task has to do when the model is already trained and there's it's about perfecting the model, what is called algorithmic verification. So the workers are confronted with the output, with the output of the system, and then they need to classify that output in terms of whether it's appropriate or inappropriate, useful or unuseful, related, unrelated, and so on. And finally, the last type of task is the least well-known, but not the most uncommon one, and is we call it AI impersonation, and it has to do with workers actually pretending to be AI systems, as is quite common when an AI system breaks down, or when there is no AI system to start with. So in this case, like for example, in the case on the slide, workers are instructed to pretend to be a chatbot, to act as a chatbot and respond as a chatbot when the user has questions. There are cases of so-called smart cameras that were advertised and sold as such, as smart cameras, as in cameras, who are able to autonomously flag anomalies when recording something. And what was behind the smart cameras was no algorithm. It was just a bunch of precarized workers in Madagascar or in Syria monitoring the cameras 24/7 and flagging the anomalies per hand. So as you can see from those examples and from those categories that I just discussed, data work is fundamentally about classification. But this classification that is done by the workers doesn't happen in a vacuum and cannot be analyzed independently from the context in which it is carried out. And this is something I have been repeated for so many years now that I'm actually tired of myself saying this. The fact that data work the fact that data work is about classifying and naming leads us to questions, or should lead us to questions in terms of who gets to decide what each data point means and what kind of social and political work those representations, those classifications perform. And I really always, when I talk about this, I really like to read this text snippets by Crawford and Paiklen from this wonderful essay that I love called Excavating AI. And it says, there's a kind of sorcery that goes into the creation of categories. To create a category or to name things is to divide an almost infinite complex universe into separate phenomena, to impose order onto an undifferentiated mass, to ascribe phenomena to a category, that is to name a thing, is in turn a means of reifying the existence of that category. And this is so on point when it comes to data work. This is the work that data workers do. But as we will see later, it is not that they do it on their own will. They are used as proxies of someone else who has the power to actually reify the existence of those categories by naming them. And here I want to highlight two moments in data work, or from all the tasks that I described before, that are specifically interesting in terms of this reification of categories through naming them. And I think the first one has to do with the specific category data and how the naming a piece of information as data does something with that piece of information and gives a specific type of validity to that information that it didn't have before. So when workers actually are asked to collect information that is publicly available somewhere, and they are given specific parameters of what to consider data, what should go into the data set, and what is to be excluded from the data set. I think that is a specific interesting moment in terms of what the systems that will be trained on that data will be able to know about the world and to reproduce about the world, what goes into the data set and what is left out of the data set, and that specific moment in which someone decides this is to be named data and the rest is not data, and also how we all consider data as something that is carrying some sort of truth about the world. When we talk about, there's this saying of based on the data, I will say this, as speaking from the position of being based on the data, I would infer that what I'm going to say with some certain flair of truth. And the second moment that I think it is very important here is the naming or the the naming of the content of, for example, in the case of image data, to make it machine readable. So the labeling, the activities that come with the labeling of data, and how that also defines how the system will understand the world. So if I label an image that contains a tree with the label tree, the system will know that that's a tree. If I don't do that, the system won't know. I think that's very interesting. So in my work, I use the Bourdieuian, and Bourdieuian means from Pierre Bourdieu, notion of symbolic power that he defines as the authority to impose meanings that will appear as legitimate and part of a natural order of things. And I use this notion as a lens to analyze the dynamics of imposition and also of naturalizations inscribed in the classification, sorting, and labeling of data. As Bourdieu says, symbolic power is not just about naming reality, but rather it is the power, he says, to make the world through utterance. Here, I guess the linguist can see how Bourdieu builds on the work of speech act theories, but I want to mention that what Bourdieu does is not just about speech act, but also to add the social dimensions of power and struggle to it. So it's not just about naming, but it's also about how the authority to name things is unevenly distributed. And this is why he talks about symbolic power, because as any power, it is not anyone has the power to do this. It correlates with the possession of influence, of knowledge, of capital. Here it's important to understand that every classification is an imposition, that it is one specific reading of reality over others that are possible. And again, the gist of it is that this power to make a classification seem natural is unevenly distributed. It is not something that I can just do and say, well, you know what, this is not a telephone anymore, this is now a pen. I have to possess some sort of authority, either conferred by my expertise or whatever by whom I am, to be able to actually name something, make that category mean something, and also make it look natural, neutral, and objective, indisputable in that way. And this is reflected now, coming back to to the ground, I would say, of data work. So this is reflected by the task instructions that are given to the data workers and are written by the requesters. These task instructions are completely narrow. Their main goal, their aim is to minimize the room for interpretation as performed by the data workers. The instructions are actually designed for the requester to impose their preferred classification on the workers and through the workers on the data. So let's take a look at the example on screen for a moment. It's a classification related to hate speech. And here there are basically two labels, so yes or no, hate speech or none. Now, just from that, imagine how many nuances are left out in between categorizing something as hate speech. Yes, it is hate speech, and no, it's not hate speech. But also on top of this, the parameters to decide whether something is hate speech or not are generally based on, and in this instruction, but in many others that I have seen, they are generally based on protected attributes according to US legislation, which leaves discrimination based on class or caste or many other types of discriminations out, and therefore is not particularly useful in other contexts that are outside of the US. I will not start discussing whether this is actually useful in the US, but I know that it is not useful in many other places that are not the US. And this is a common thread with the instructions. And I'm talking from a place in which we have analyzed over 200 instruction documents for a study. This is something that repeats itself all the time. The predefined categories for labeling, for collecting data, are based on the worldviews and cultural assumptions of requesters who are, as we saw on the map, in many cases located in the so-called global north, mostly in the US, but don't necessarily make sense to the data worker in Argentina, in Venezuela, Syria, Kenya, or or the majority of the world. It is also worth mentioning that this task was sent to Spanish-speaking Latin American workers. This is specifically a study that we run in Venezuela and Argentina. This was sent to workers in those two places. And the instructions, as you can see on the slide, they are in English. And they are not in English because I translated them for this talk. They are given to the workers in English. All the 200 instructions, or I would say, because we pre-selected a couple, the 500 instructions that came to my hands and the corpus we selected, they were all in English because, yeah, the workers need to make sense of that, and it's their problem. The requester doesn't care. If the requester communicates in English, the worker needs to adapt to that. So the second example shows a task that includes racial classification, also using a very narrow predefined label, once more in this case based on a US-centric conception of racial classification. And this is on top of the fact that these workers, I'm not even starting to analyze the fact that these workers are asked to guess people's race from an image. So what I was telling you before, this doesn't necessarily make sense to the workers. I remember very specifically one data worker in Venezuela. He was a Black Venezuelan man. And he was telling us, well, you know, if I had to classify myself according to these categories, I wouldn't know if I should put myself under African American or Latinx. But it doesn't matter, you know, by now I know the worker, I know the requester, I know what they expect. So I just do that. It doesn't matter if it doesn't make sense to me. Okay, but maybe you're thinking, but there is the category ambiguous at the end of the list. That should be good to actually flag that it is not possible that to guess people's race from their faces. That should be good to signalize that these categories shouldn't be mutually exclusive. But I'm sorry to disappoint you here, and in most of the instructions that we've analyzed, the categories ambiguous or other, as you see on the last example, or any other type of these residual categories are only to be used in cases where, as it says here, there is no face in the box, the image cannot be open, or the data point or the text is not clear, or the worker is not certain. So it is not here to signalize, for example, in the last example, that there might be something beyond the binary gender conception of male, female. It is not there. These categories are not there for that. And also, you know, most of the instructions even contain this type of warning or threat, you can call it threat, that if workers are not accurate, they will be banned from the job or expelled from the platform. They won't be paid, that's as it says here. And in no cases, there isn't specification of what these categories of accuracy and high quality mean. There is no objective or neutral value of, okay, this is what we mean by high quality. In all cases, this means interpreting data according to the instructions provided by the clients. And the work interfaces serve the same function. So they generally have here this drop-down menu that you see on the, I don't know if you see my mouse, but it's on the right down hand side of the screen, this drop-down menu where these categories are embedded, and nowhere on the screen there is a and also not in the instructions there is a an indication of who is the client, what company is requesting this data, what is it going to be used for. The workers generally don't know for whom and for what they are working. And also they cannot remove from that drop-down menu, they cannot remove add or change any of the categories. As you see here, the labeler in this case has no rights to edit classes and attributes. The only one who has the rights to do that is the project owner, who is the requesters. And also these interfaces, these systems, or most of them, don't even allow the workers to communicate with the requester. They don't even have like something basic as a chat function that could be used by the workers to actually ask questions or to signal that maybe they don't agree with the labels, that they don't see these categories to be appropriate to work with the data that they are supposed to work with. But even in the cases where the workers where this was technically possible, even if there was a chat function to communicate back to the requesters, the workers are not prone to question task instructions, because why would they? They need the jobs to make ends meet. In the many cases in which the workers are also migrants, they need the job to keep their visa. They are subject to this type of warnings that I showed you before. So why would they be motivated to contradict the client? They are, on the contrary, very much trained to obey. The whole system, the whole apparatus is designed to have workers obey the instructions and then the classifications imposed by the requester, and to, you know, keep that status quo. And this is very clear when the workers, in the few instances in which workers talk to each other and deliberate, if they ask themselves, if they are not sure about a specific task instruction and they want to, you know, they ask a colleague, hey, what do you think about this? How can we do this better? Or you know, did you understand this instruction? I'm not sure. The rationale of that discussion in all the places that I've been to and with all the workers that I've spoken to with, the rationale is always, let's figure out what the client wants and not how can we make this data better or what would be best for this data and therefore for the systems that will be trained on this data. It's always, let's try to figure out what the rationale of the requester is so that we are not kicked out of the platform, so that the client is happy. And I guess this is why data work is often outsourced to the margins. This is not just about low prices. It is about low prices, but this is also about keeping workers obedient, finding workers who are so dependent on this work that they are not prone to question anything. So requesters, data companies, and platforms take advantage of the social context in which the workers find themselves, again, not only to pay miserable wages, but also to perpetuate hegemonic views. So narrow instructions and work interfaces, precarious labor conditions, and local contexts shaped by economic crisis, they all work as an apparatus that ensures that data workers remain obedient, producing data that reproduces the worldviews of those in power. Because the conclusion is, whoever has enough money to pay for data work has the power to impose their preferred classifications. They impose their preferred classifications on the workers and through them, through their labor, on data and systems. So we can say that power asymmetries in data work, they are not only about the data workers, and they are not only problematic for the data workers, they are not only as a research topic for us labor sociologists, and also not something to be discussed only among data rights advocates, but it's something that affects us all, because the same power asymmetries and terrible conditions that affect data workers fundamentally shape data and systems. And again, this is not just about solidarity with the data workers, although I really hope that among you, there's people who are moved by solidarity with workers who are less fortunate than we are. That's certainly what moves me. But I think the thing that is important to know is that it's also about us all and about the systems with which we are confronted on daily basis, systems that in many cases have a major influence in our access to resources or the ways in which we are classified and are allowed to enter places or kept out of them. So I guess that's it. Thank you very much. And I look forward to questions and comments from you.